Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Just remember we're supposed to be going live, so we're live now. Hello, everybody. We are joined by Richard and people. Where should we go first? Should we go first to the miserable man, the alarmist in the bottom left corner, who has released his, almost released his files, and has got the world talking a little bit about ADS-B. It's been invented all over again. Well done for reinventing ADS-B.
So I have a wheel here if you want it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it astounding that people still don't know what ADS-B is?
Yeah, I mean, I can hardly spell it, but I know what it is.
You're quite so. So where are we with this thing? Where is it? I mean, you were looking pretty miserable in that photo, pretty serious.
No, I was looking serious. You're serious. This is serious. For safety, you can't trivialize safety. It's very important. Just ask CIA; they will tell you.
That's
yeah.
True.
So I'm just polishing at the moment. Just a little bit of polish, just get a bit of brass, bit of buffing.
You can't polish it, no.
Anyway, I'll put glitter on it. You can put glitter on it, but it'll still be
yes, exactly. But it's so that's the files must be nearly ready to go for us all to build.
Yeah, I had it out there at the field on the weekend. It worked perfectly. We had beeps going off when planes were coming in before we could hear them. It was excellent. It's just I noticed a couple of other little display errors, which I'm just fixing up now. And I'm also just integrating this. There's another LCD which I've found, which I'll be integrating into the code, so I'll be able to select which LCD. And the one thing we did discover was it's damn annoying when a plane's in the circuit and the alarm's going beep, beep, beep all the time. So several strategies have been suggested to me for dealing with that situation, and I'm implementing those now, so it won't keep beeping when there's planes in the circuit.
Yeah, I see. Good day to Troy from Quad Standard Labs, QSL cards. I don't know if you know your radio ham stuff there, Troy, but that's what I think of immediately when I see that. Let's go. So let's jump to Troy first, because we like to keep Richard waiting. So that's always a good thing. I was going to segue into ADS-B and Richard's stuff. We'll jump to Troy, and Troy's company, Quad Standard Labs, has now. Troy, you're going to have to say this for me. Cesario FPV Cine Lifter. Let me put that in the comments.
So,
did I get that right?
Yeah. Hey, Gary. And man, what a crew to just step into. I kind of thought I was going to jump on here. I've seen it before, but I genuinely was like, oh, 4 o'clock, we'll jump in. It'll just be, hanging out. No, you guys are going already. Awesome to see and honestly just be on this screen with you guys. Quad Standard Labs, that's my company. So just to quickly try to bring it all as a whole. So the Sicario is what we ended up calling it. And when I say we, that goes for me, Gab 707 and Andy Shin, who those two guys are much more well known than I am. Andy, of course, of Shin Drones, and then Gab 707 from DRL. He's a scientist, actual physics science doctorate, and also happens to travel the world, being one of the best FPV cinematic FPV pilots, probably, as well as all the other accolades. So, anybody that follows what those two guys do, kind of know that Andy makes professional tools. He does it in an area that exists around the hobby, and he has a hobbyist kind of following because of the early days, especially where racing, which is still kind of a hobby, that's still kind of that amateurism and that hobby side of the FPV side. But for the most part, all of his platforms were developed because a professional asked him to help solve a problem. So when I say we, those guys developed some awesome stuff, and they've basically created the Cinelifter category, which can probably be given more credit to Finky Benoit. If anybody follows his work, he actually started a group on Facebook called Cinelifters, and it was basically evolved around what Andy and Gab were doing at the time, and some other bigger, heavy, people using what was X-class racing drones at the time also, and carrying large frame cameras. And so Cinelifter is just kind of a terminology now that I see things like that and I try to run with it. You know, I see when people create innovative, whether it's terminology or just things, and I try to help push that in whatever way I can. So of course, Stinalifter took off as kind of just something, and we all just kind of coined it and used it. So that kind of tells you a little bit about what it is, which so Sicario is the name of the platform.
So why do I need to do that? Why do I need? Oh, and there's Greg. Oh, fantastic. Greg's here as well. G'day, Greg.
Yeah. Sorry for being late.
No, well, hang on. Let me just make a note of that. Let's deduct marks. I'm just going to deduct some marks there, Greg. There we go. Right, all right, taking that off. No, good to see you, mate. So why do we need these FPV cine lifters? What's wrong with? Why can't I just fly my DJI stuff? Surely that's good enough.
Yeah.
What on earth do I need this for?
I guess it just depends on what you're looking for the end content. And the funny thing is I could go on for days about the why, because honestly, the why, we don't even know all the whys. Every day we're getting new whys. Every flight, every time someone puts a new perspective out there, that becomes a why. How do I recapture that? How do I get that and translate that into what my vision is? And I think for me, I've been on this path of cinematic FPV being its own kind of area for a few reasons that are kind of core reasons. And one, they're dumb drones. You can look at that and you can expound that onto a whole daily conversation, like I said, of skill level of personnel. You operating it can create different things and all of that, and that just alone creates a tool that's specific to somebody's skill set, which is any market can use, right? I mean, you go to that to, okay, well, people are worried about privacy and security issues. Well, dumb drones don't have those issues. We can actually get around a lot of the issues with why people can't fly certain types of drones, just because of the fact that there's no connectivity. I'm using this radio, I'm controlling that drone, I'm doing some things, everything captured is on a high-end camera. I mean, it's not connected to anything, it's just capturing data, right? Or capturing imagery. So at the end of the day, I mean, that's the basic kind of idea. Is there's lots of reasons, but it's specific to FPV, it's the perspective. And that's what I love. That's what got me to where I am today. I've traveled through all of the areas of drone technology, so to speak, as far as where I started was the bigger stuff, aerial imaging stuff and stuff to get AP work. And, I wanted to be an aerial photographer when I knew nothing about photography. I was a noob. But that led me to the consumerized products, which I worked for companies that actually put out these consumerized products. But at the end of the day, the freedom and control and the way that it, like I said, it puts it into the perspective of the pilot, so to speak, which what we're learning now is the pilots are awesome, but the pilots aren't the creative types and the producers and the ones that need to get the shot. And up until now, nobody's really given any credence to these perspectives because the cameras were never usable. Well, now that the cameras are usable, the DPs see the images and go, wait, I have a vision for what I could do with that. Now, he can't take it and do it, but just like he can't take a $80,000 camera and on set focus it in on a toothpick, that's the camera guy's, operator's job. He's going to hire an operator that's going to do the job. So now we're seeing is, funny enough, I don't do this, but I'd like to relate things. We're watching Netflix High Score kind of as a family, and it talks about the evolution of video games. And literally last night I had a conversation with my 10-year-old about EA and how EA went from, wait, that guy just said he started a company called Electronic Arts. Is that EA like what I know today? And I'm like, well, kind of. But there's this huge evolution of what EA is now, and it's not what he saw on the TV screen last night, which was, the first John Madden football game. They are a completely different company doing completely different things now, but they've enabled so many more. So that's, again, where I see kind of what I'm looking to do, which is we're just looking to put the hardware in the people's hands that are going to take these perspectives that the pilots can do, that can create, and use them as a paintbrush, so to speak, within whatever it is. And to do that, you got to have higher quality cameras. And so we're at a point where all of that matures together. The hardware can fly really smooth and stable, pretty much not needing much post. And that's just due to tuning and hardware at this point. And so that's development. And the cameras are now coming out that are disposable and high end enough for us to fly giant cameras. So pretty cool stuff. I don't know. I hope I summed it up as quickly as possible.
Top answers. Top answers, Troy. Can I throw it out into the floor, chaps?
The first question is, and you kind of replied already, is how much post-processing it is required, because you usually can see very short takes, very, very, very short takes, but you cannot see very long takes. So all the usual problems from a drone footage might come up, like the vibrations of the drone, and usually you don't see that. Even the best drones will have some vibration, but we cannot see that on those. So my question is, what kind of post-processing is usually done to the raw footage coming from a camera?
So this is where Troy gets to say, guys, I can't answer your questions, unfortunately.
Okay.
No, I can't, honestly. I can give you my general understanding, but I like to preface this by saying I have no expensive cameras the most expensive camera I own is about $1,000 GH85. It's a great camera for terrestrial stuff for somebody like me that doesn't know what they're doing. But I don't fly these things with the big cameras, and I don't take it and I don't process it, and I don't do anything with that. That's not my skill set. However, this speaks to almost the why again. So at the very kind of heart at FPV Perspectives, there's a few core fundamental things that it does that traditional drone work isn't. It's not, it can be slow, and that's fine. And slow is not a bad thing, but it's not typically the slow, typical traditional shots of the overheads and the pullbacks and the horizon shots. These are the things that make up the toolkit, so to speak, of what traditional drones shoot. They do it really well. They can track objects really well and really stable at decent speed, depending on how big you go with the platform. However, there is a speed issue with that, where you get to 30, 40 miles an hour and you start running into issues even with some of these bigger platforms that are AP rigs. So again, the why is, like you said, we're always chasing. FPV pilots are continually chasing the single long shot, the continual shot, the raw shot, the unedited shot, whatever it is that we call it as pilots. In my FPV persona called Chef PV, I just called them uncut or one hits, like one hit rips, which meant basically they were one hit, unedited. You could see it from start to finish. If it had vibe, it did. If it didn't, it didn't. But at the end of the day, that's always been our goal, is these one single take. So we are at the point to where if you tune the aircraft right, which that's where we put it in the hands of professionals. So we take these things, we build them professionally to the best standards that we can at QSL. We load them with the payload weights that are given to us by the people that are flying their specific setups. And we then run tuning data on it, and we either tune from afar with engineers that know what the tuning data looks like, or in some cases, we send them directly to them. With Sicario, they're directly hand-tuned by Mark Spatz at UAV Tech. So he goes through and he basically eliminates all the gyro noise and all the noise. He tells us all the issues. So Sicario was developed out of the Thick platform. And the Thick platform is a universal tool that was the first kind of Cinelifter Andy did. And so now that we learned all that data from that, they've incorporated that into the design to where all of the battles that we had with Thick have now been solved. We center masted put all the mass in the center. The thrust and everything is all at the right spots. And what we hope to achieve by this is when we send it to get tuned by the engineers for these very specific payloads, that we get just incredibly clean data back, and we don't have to over-tune these things the way we did before to get them to perform as well, and actually now at this point even better. So once we have the platform stabilized and all that, we have, and I have some around here, we have some other special sauce, so to speak, that Andy and Gab came up with. So they came up with some dampening platforms, which you guys know, I mean, dampening platforms are a science, right? So after a lot of testing and using the SICK platform and Thick, they've come up with some dampeners that really work for the payload size that we're talking about. So with the dampeners in place, with the quads fully tuned, or they're not even quads, the octos fully tuned at this point, the answer to your question is it could require post, and probably will, again, at y'all's level of needing of vibration free. But you will probably be very surprised at how little post work you need. And then the tools that also can go into that. I mean, again, I could talk all day, but Gab works with Steady XP or Stead XP. I don't know very much about it. All I know is Gab has worked directly with them as well as with it a lot, and these dampening plates to basically have it all worked out. So these dampening plates with Stead XP, with the Z-Cam specifically, it's just going to be a solid, you're going to get solid results. So I don't know how else to put it other than that without getting into the how much post. I don't know, and I'm not sure. I mean, having Gab on sometime to talk about that would definitely be something worth doing, I think.
Something I was going to ask is, obviously you guys are running Betaflight from the look of it on some of them. How is it handling these sort of payloads? Because obviously this is well in excess of anything Betaflight was really initially designed for.
We haven't seen any issues myself. I've built at this point almost 15 of these Cinelifters that are carrying between 2.5 to, we put 5 pounds on this 8-inch one we built for somebody recently. No issues as pertaining to the Betaflight issue, no. To speak to the current development we're doing is under Betaflight. So like everything, this all starts somewhere, right? It all has to begin at a baseline product. So if you look at the Sicario page, funny enough, it actually says base model. And the reason why is it is right now being built with some very slightly adjusted componentry. So we're ordering, motors specifically with wire link. We're ordering motors specifically with our specs, some smaller specs. The hardware, the flight controllers and the ESCs are going to start coming directly from the factories, wired and ready to go the way we need them to. Now, other things that we're working on are, as soon as this thing gets launched and is able to be had, because that's the problem right now, is I have DPs and production companies calling me almost daily asking me, what can we do to get faster, get it faster? And the problem is we're trying to do something that hasn't been done yet, really, which is put this into a real production, into production. And to do that, production has to be going and has to have product ready. This isn't Troy building everybody's drone anymore. This is a actual manufacturing facility providing us certified production on a product. And so I've got to go through the process of transferring all the stuff to them and getting them up to speed on building these and working out all of the logistics and the back end business of having that finalized, which we're doing. We're done. We're still right on track to aim at, if not better than our target date. But the funny thing is I still have to say, no, guys, like, you're going to get these units when they come off the assembly line. I'm not going to make one next week for you. So once we have these things out, the next stage is developing multiple derivatives. So taking them and, first of all, putting iNav and having that tuned out and fleshed out as far as having some more sophisticated abilities to do with some waypoints and stuff that some clients have been wanting to do, as well as some GPS stuff that they want to be able to have. And then really from there, my goal has always been to basically put RG Pilot on one of these guys. And, I've been trying to do it for about 1.5 years now, but I just haven't had the time to get around to get one loaded up and then sent off to somebody, an RG expert, to tune it. But yeah, I mean, that would be the next goal. Is I have all these people within my network that I work with. It's just a matter of getting the hardware ready. So once I have production going and Troy's able to basically grab these things off the shelf and say, this week, we're going to turn one into an RG Pilot based system. That's really what I'm shooting for. Is I'm looking forward to next year where I'm not handling day-to-day building or even managing the production very much as just receiving the products, configuring the products, and then also finding more applications for them. So that's kind of my goal for the product. But for right now, yes, it is running Betaflight hardware, and no issues.
No, if it works, it's okay.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, it's keep it simple, right? Like you want it to work. I mean, it's performed on sets all around. Like I said, I mean, we've built exact same hardware. We've put in 15 plus of mine and all the other ones that people say they have built, and we're running almost all the identical same hardware. So we've Thick was a test bed for this, and it's funny that you asked the first question about the name. SICC, actually, technically, it is what Andy wanted to call the frame. That's actually what he called the frame after Thick. So he had the Thick frame, and he called in our back-end, pre-production R&D stuff, before I even knew of it, he called it Sick, just jokingly. So we actually went through, me, Andy, and Gab, 3 or 4 different name kind of sessions. And on the very last session, we had decided on Scorpio, but Gab was not happy with it. And so I started Googling random stuff, and I don't remember why I came up with, Sicario, but, the real spelling is one single C. We just tossed the extra C in there, so it would be kind of an inside joke, or at least the development team, the people that know, like, we still call it Sick, So it's just, it's interesting backstory to that actually was the lead question. So just figured out.
Dr. Greg, who's joined us, I'm just gonna
mute me.
Just time out there, Troy. Just time out a second there, Troy. But he's actually got kind of the perfect use case and not the perfect use case for the RG Pilot version of this, because Dr. Greg, sadly, I guess I have to say, Greg, you've been out in the fires again, and you've produced. I know you've got to go very shortly, so tell us very quickly about the firework that you've got and how this sort of thing might help you.
Yeah, so this is my 4th fatal wildfire that I've been on. So this is the area that burned recently, just on the other side of Paradise, that had burned in 2018. And so this is in Butte County here in California that's been impacted by the fires, as well as some other issues with the dam a couple of years ago, almost failing. So they made a request. Law enforcement drone teams came in. It was like 8 to 12 teams this time from 4 different agencies, coordinated by the Alameda County Sheriff's Department. And so we were requested as the data support specialists to work under them. So we're just working out in the field alongside the safety side, which coordinates access through the FAA waivers for flying in the TFRs, as well as visibility waivers for the smoke. So actually no manned aircraft could fly at the time anyway, because of visibility, because it's pretty poor air quality up there. It's really steep up there, and it's a different than Paradise in that it's about 3,000 homes over about 60,000 acres, instead of Paradise, which was about 18,000 homes or structures in a town. So it's much more dispersed in terms of we couldn't really map the whole area, and even trying to map target areas, there was a lot of challenge because of the visibility issues and then terrain. Even using terrain following, it's just was way sketchier. So we were able to do about 350 panos. It's easy point location surveys over about 50 square miles, and we could do that in a day and a half, as well as tracing video. So I pasted in there, there's video on a map in there, and that's just tracing video over the critical infrastructure. So I think that the better tool is really, this is just using the telemetry inside of the video. And so the better tool that I see for the FPV side is give me a 16-year-old and an FPV setup that can really fly and trace all these roads incredibly quickly, but you're just handing it out, and that's just tracing infrastructure, and then I just need the video. I can put the video on a map, and I can do it with the newer GoPros as well. And you can check out those maps. That's my setup. I mean, I think that would be great for the next fire, which we're prepping for right now, to go in. But then we take all of the SD cards. This time it was about a half a terabyte of data, and then try it. We went to the university actually, to their Ethernet, and we just batch uploaded on about a dozen computers all of the data. And then now I'm working for a company called GeoAcuity. I just joined them about a month ago, and we're a full service GIS specialist shop. So we're able to compile all the maps in-house, create the websites, and then we would deliver those to the county. And then I recorded a quick YouTube video that just basically explains how to interact with the maps, and then in like normal person, not geeky map speak, and try and keep it real and just talk to people normally, like, hey, click here, and this is what this shows you. And so we turned everything around in 36 hours after the drones landed. So 48-hour deployment, turning around in 24 to 36 hours. So I'm getting faster. I think I could do it in real time if I had a big enough team and just an Ethernet connection that could just stream data. And then that's it. We walked away. It was a much less stressful experience because we have a full house to support, like building the websites, making sure there's overlays. And when you click on a panorama, you can turn on all the fire damage that's pulling in from somewhere else. I'd like to see it nested with satellite data or manned aircraft data coming in. Like drones are just one tool. How do we like combine the layers and provide some thought leadership on like, it's one tool of many tools. But in this case, the drones were the only tool because nobody could fly manned aircraft and the satellites couldn't come in. So using like Mavics and Phantoms again, is like, it turns out drones are useful. It turns out.
It's amazing that it's not as all of this isn't as connected as it should be. You're exactly right. We have all the tools. We watched that. It was a pretty bad fire actually, not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before here. Went through the back, and I was watching people driving around, and I was watching people panicking over the other side of the dam. It wasn't there to help. Sounds like it, doesn't it? But I see there was plenty of people there. But you could see there was no coordination between them other than cell phones and stuff. And also it would have been really nice because the wind was really strong if there was a few weather stations out and about. If we had a real-time prediction of where it might go based on where it is, even just a rough tool. Because that fire that started about 2 or 3 miles that way, it ended up running about 40 miles.
Yeah, the same with this fire. It ran about 2,000 acres an hour for overnight. So it killed. So far, they found about 15 people, and people were trying to outrun it, and they couldn't outrun it. So I think, and that's one of dozens of fires across the entire West Coast. So we're looking to go into another fire shortly. I can't talk about it, but it's another damage assessment. But all of Oregon is on fire, and this is September, and Campfire in Paradise was November 8th. So we have a month and a half to go, So
when is your peak fire season generally there then?
July through November, I guess. I think it's getting longer, and that's the problem. We still have 150 million dead trees in the Sierra Nevadas of California from drought 5 years ago. All of us and lots of rural communities that live up in the mountains, and so when we have the big wind events and the fires kick up, it just can really get out of control quickly. But I got about 2 more minutes. If you have any other questions,
no, I have a quick question, and it's not for you; it's for Richard. Given the scenario that Greg showed, how can we use Altitude Angel? Or could we have a special feature of Altitude Angel to coordinate all these flights on these catastrophe areas?
I think that's a brilliant question. I'd be happy to hook up with Greg and see how we can get our software out there and facilitate. But today the software will take flight plans from pretty much anyone who submits it, as well as real-time telemetry, and help to provide that deconfliction out of the box. But if we can help get Greg and co up to speed and running,
I think,
we'd be happy to do that.
I'm not actually flying most of the time. I'm just handling all the data, but I can have 20 pilots and track them in the field. In fact, I spent most of this time standing at the like small town post office by myself, surrounded by like police vehicles and satellite dishes, but it was just me, you know. So I think being able to track that and understand like how many acres, how many flights, and how much have we done, and then how long do we have left to go, and how does that transfer to gigabytes, and then that passes on to my team of how many people we need and how fast of an internet. So we're putting the pieces together in ways that like I feel like are real. It's not just like drone industry, Silicon Valley hype. Like it's real. Like look at the maps. We're using maps and panoramas and video, the same tools we use for storytelling. We're just telling the story of a disaster zone in a way that's simple and easy and intuitive. And that's what we're trying to do as a company as well, is, hey, drop us in with any pilots anywhere in the world and we'll turn your data around as fast as possible, offline or online, like, you know, and we'll train everyone else to do it too, you know.
Quick question, Greg. Sorry. Quick question. How important is real-time data for you guys? The drone flying and streaming that real-time data back to a command center, and
it's more for operations that the real-time stuff is. It's tracking the fields and deployment and things that I let like the people with badges kind of like, they're good at hurting themselves in this environment. It's more for me to track the data flow of saying, hey, you know, how do I track this better? So I'm always doing the math of like, how many acres, how many teams, how much information, and how fast can I turn it around?
But there must surely be some sort of a fire service system that is, because they must also need to know that. Where are the fire engines? What are they doing? Where are the crews?
Yeah, so it's really just taking pieces that have been already operationalized and then just, you know, making it. Drones are just a new tool. So everyone, you know, I know for us, like they're not new. Like I can be rather tired of them at times. But I think that for agencies, like it's slow. It's slow. I mean, this is like my fourth fire in 3.5 years, and we're only just showing proof of concept still, you know? So I think we're still such early days in terms of doing things at scale. But I got to run. But hey, if I finish this call by 3 or so, I'll try and ping back on.
Beautiful. All right. Look after
you. Thanks,
Cheers. Well, thank goodness he's gone. We can talk about him now.
No, this is important. Sorry, that's why I asked Richard about getting Altitude Angel on this, because that's one of the ways that we have to show that drones are not that bad, like some ill person wants us to alarm us to think about, and and Richard, sorry, I've put you on the spot because it's a near real-time engagement and challenge for Altitude Angel.
It's the sort of thing that needs almost some sort of a system that you could stand up a corridor really quickly, or a protected bit of airspace, perhaps using some form of tower-based system that could be rolling out. I don't know. What do you think, Richard?
I think that was a very unplanned segue into the Arrow segment. So I thank you unanimously for that. But I think just before we do move on to that, it might be worth saying to Louis, you might have seen the announcement we made within Marsat a couple of months back, actually, around the pop-up UTM concept. And that was actually around not relying on any ground infrastructure and using satellite connectivity in sort of disaster relief areas for real-time aggregation of flight data. It's a little bit more awkward when you're talking about potentially having lots and lots of drones streaming, say, 4K video over a satellite link, because then cost comes into it. But if you're more interested in the flight data itself, the telemetry, then it can be very low cost and can be stood up anywhere. But you know, the offer is definitely there to help Greg and co deal with those kind of first responder scenarios. It's something that's very close to our hearts. We have a lot of individual police forces, fire services, etc., using our systems today, but put them all together in a big area. And I think the coordination is something that we could certainly help with.
And I'm sorry, Troy, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier, and we'll certainly bring you back into play. And please jump in at any time. And the most important thing if there's two rules here, Troy, we don't allow common sense. definitely banned. But the primary rule is you've got to take the mickey out of Richard. You have to ask him some question he'll be embarrassed to answer. That is just the law around here. It's just
I don't even
it's
know
just a
Richard.
rule.
We don't know each other well enough. I mean, I don't have a problem asking him a question that makes him uncomfortable, but
No, it's fine.
I
No,
don't
no,
know
no,
if we're
it's
on
fine.
no
It's all right.
All right, well, fine.
So, Gary,
I
I've
have
outsourced
no
my emotional
problem chiming in. So.
Gary, I've outsourced my emotional responses in a way that I think Ian would like, and I've put together a solution so that when you ask a question that's off limits, my lamp over here is going to go red. And then it's fine, it's going to go back to blue. Okay. And if you're just not sure, it will just kind of sit in this kind of color. So,
Oh, you got me there. You got me there. Very good. Very good. So, Richard, you are the talk of the town in the UK newspapers at the moment. Not like alarmist there because you're a criminal, but because you're standing up a delivery drone corridor, because that's what the press believe you're doing. You're opening the door for Amazon somewhere to the south of Reading, or near Reading in Berkshire. Tell us a bit more about what's going on with that. Whatever you can, Richard. Don't let me drag out anything you're not allowed to say.
Before he answers, is that the special version of Amazon Prime, especially for you, Richards?
I can only hope so. I never get my goods fast enough, despite the fact there is a depot about 10 kilometers away from me.
Gosh, if only had some way of delivering it to you quickly.
I know, right? If only someone would build a corridor.
Well, your corridor is only 8 kilometers, isn't it? You're 10 kilometers.
Work at 2Ks.
The drone has to travel really fast so that it can release the payload and it can travel the remaining 2K on its own. But it's a good question, and it's interesting because I think we've seen a lot of the media has exercised a little bit of creative license. It's certainly not intended to only be for the use of delivery drones. You can think of it much more like we call it a superhighway. So the idea is that it's an area in which you can fly a drone over a long distance without a pilot, and potentially even do that completely automated. For pretty much any commercial purpose. So that could be search and rescue, that could be inspections, that could be other sort of survey missions, and of course it can be deliveries as well. So it's designed to be like really low barrier to entry to get people flying and to do it safely.
So what is the barrier? What do I need to do if I turn up to Reading and I get off of that? Was it Majeski Stadium or whatever it is? I get off the highway there, and I've got my drone. What do I need to do to operate it legally within your system?
So there's a couple of things that we have to go through. There's an onboarding process with all new partners, all new entrants, and that's just to check that they've got the right kind of engineering resources, that they can commit to the trials that we want to do, and they can actually not just turn up and do one flight, because we've got a whole flying program that we're working through with the CAA to prove that the efficacy of the technology, etc. So once all of that's occurred, the actual technical integration is incredibly minimal. So I'm not going to go into very, very specific details, but I can tell you one of the design objectives for Arrow was making sure that drones that wanted to fly in the corridor didn't have to come from, say, one specific manufacturer, which is very common when you look at the kind of test corridors that exist. They're only open to a few. And the second one we really wanted to make sure was that drones didn't have to have additional hardware on board. So, for example, they didn't have to carry their own detect and avoid systems or sensors or LiDARs, etc. And equally didn't have to carry different types of communications equipment on board. Because again, this all, if you're talking about a very small form factor aircraft or a small airframe, that detracts from the payload that you can actually carry, reduces flight time, etc. And usually you can only pick one, maybe two types of sensor that are very good at spotting one or two types of hazard. Where it's very difficult to find one sensor that kind of can rule everything and do it all very well in all different conditions. And that's really where the ground infrastructure side of Arrow comes into it. And what the towers are there to support. So in other words, if you have a super duper amazing, as yet uninvented drone that has satellite connectivity on board, 4G, 5G, long range radio, and a bunch of other systems, you can fly that in the corridor But equally, it's in theory possible to build something that uses just, for example, Wi-Fi, and the towers will support and supplement the information on your vehicle with the information in the tower network.
Is the tower network directly seeing? Just don't answer this if you can't. ADSB traffic and doing the Mode S and all that sort of thing. Is it pulling all that stuff in, or are you getting that from somewhere else?
Yeah, so the precise ingredient list on the towers is a closely guarded secret at the moment, but it will become public soon. But I can certainly confirm that it does pick up ADSB. It uses all traditional aviation and popular sort of surveillance frequencies, but it also has some active sensing hardware on board as well, which it's able to use to detect very small aircraft like drones, as well as other, for example, GA that aren't carrying transponders, for instance. So it's designed again to provide, we are aiming for 100% conspicuity of everything flying through there. So if we can't identify it, that's not necessarily an issue, as long as we can see it, and we can move our aircraft out of the way of any other conflicting objects. That's the goal.
So your NATS Mini then?
Certainly not our intention to be an ANSP. There are all sorts of regulatory hurdles with that, of course, but we're very much focused on very low altitude, getting a fantastic view 0 to 400 feet and seeing everything that's within that sort of horizon. So being able to get, as I say, the design objective being 100% visibility into the area around those towers, so that we can create these corridors in which it is effectively safe to operate beyond your physical line of sight.
So how many towers are there then?
So in this corridor that we're establishing, there are 3. There is no requirement to have 3 or 4 or 5. They're designed to mesh first and foremost. They're also designed to operate in isolation. So you can think about one of the characteristics of these towers is fantastic visibility, surveillance, effectively. And you can deploy an arrow tower at a single facility, like, for instance, an airport or a power station where you need visibility. And again, this is not just about surveillance. We have the surveillance technology built into Arrow so that you can conduct drone operations safely within that area because of the surveillance. So areas where you typically don't get to fly can potentially start to welcome drone traffic, because now they can see it and quantify the risk.
So it's almost a detection system. So basically it's a detection system of some format. If you're saying you can see everything there, so if I was to fly a model plane, for example, would you see it?
Yeah.
Technically, there's no RF noise coming from that plane.
Yeah, so we do have a combination of sensors on board, and some of them do sniff or listen for RF, but not all of them require emitted RF signals. And which is a big bugbear of mine, actually, in the sense that a lot of security operations today focus almost exclusively on having just one type of sensor, for example, that only listens for RF, but clearly there are attack vectors where RF is not something that's going to be deployed. And here it's a case of saying, well, okay, then there might not be an active RF control signal. We still need to see that object. So the same goes for whether that's a drone or that's a very large aircraft. We have to be able to see everything in the sky. And just for your clarity, and I guess the listeners' clarity as well, the CAA here in the UK are evaluating this solution as, specifically as a detect and avoid capability.
So how does it not see a bird as a drone?
So the sensors are incredibly sensitive, and there are obviously false positives at the moment. But our responsibility as the kind of Arrow operator and the provider of the UTM services is to share what we're seeing back with the sensor manufacturers and help them refine those algorithms that do the track detection and work out what they're looking at. And because of that characteristic, because everyone is ultimately still learning with it, we also have some optical sensors on the towers that allow us to actually dial in and verify what we're seeing. and we train those algorithms.
Yeah, I thought he was going to say cameras somewhere in there, because it's the only those cameras, because I've seen a few of them and I've worked with a few drone detection systems. It's all right seeing the RF noise, but if you had a radar, for example, and I don't know if your system does or not, because they only go, even the good ones only 5K. Getting rid of all the birds out of that system's just horrendous.
There's a lot of noise. I think it's fair to say any analog sensor has noise, right? We work with quite a few different radar sensor manufacturers, for example, and they'll be the first to tell you that the secret sauce is not necessarily in the hardware, because a lot of very similar hardware out there. It's the algorithms and the processing and the track verification and the false positives that they're able to pull out, etc. So there's some incredibly sophisticated hardware. And the way the Arrow towers are effectively constructed is to standardize and normalize the data that comes off of those sensors, so that we can swap them out. We can have multiple different variations on board the towers, and that works really well when you consider that when we design an Arrow installation, we design it for the terrain in which it's operating within and the kind of risk profile that we're expecting. So we wouldn't necessarily have the full complement of Arrow sensors on board at every location, depending on that risk profile. So it's a bit like when you're an airport, you are choosing your favorite drone detection systems out there. You equip them for the types of threats that you're hoping to manage. It's very similar with the surveillance side on the Arrow towers here.
Are you running? Sorry, Ian. Are you running? Are people actively trying to aggress against the tower network? Because I'm thinking. It's pretty woody around Reading. There's quite a few high spots, but not many. So I'd have thought sighting enough towers to get really good view at very low level would be interesting.
It can be really tough, but the route that we've selected is taking quite a while to pick, but it's actually more or less parallel to the M4, and it actually flies over the railway and flies over the M4 a couple of times throughout the route. So it's quite a flat chunk that we've picked. Yeah. We picked that specifically also for visibility, but also because it's got at one end a very busy business park. So there's lots of offices, lots of urban dense environment, and then further away it gets a little bit more rural, but gets a bit more sort of industrial, estatey. And that gives us a nice mixture of different flying environments, but also the terrain is nice and flat. So
you'd be staying away from that nuclear establishment that's there, or is that no longer there?
AWE in Burfield.
Yeah,
the route is not adjacent to AWE Burfield.
But all right, then the thing I'm going to throw at you is my having to go at Richard comment is. Surely a lot of light aircraft are going to be avoiding that huge danger area anyway by a chunky amount, if they've got any sense. So if you wrap your test area around a danger area, then aren't you already you're giving yourself a little bit of protection, aren't you? That's my nasty comment to Richard.
I would need to overlay the aeronautical data again on the Arrow route, but I think if I recall correctly, there's a good 5-6 kilometers of separation between the boundary. But don't quote me on that. In fact, I think one of the guys is online now checking it as we speak, because they don't want to let
people used to tell me off I only know about that because people used to tell me off from that place when I used to fly over it, and then people used to come out with funny flashing light vans and things like that. It was a very, very unfriendly part of the country, and it's also not marked on the map. But anyway,
two questions for you, Richard.
Okay, I'll try to give answers as well.
So here we go. So obviously, I'm assuming that you guys are investing in this network and building this network as part of your infrastructure. And if this was to continue across the UK, what stops Altitude Agent becoming a monopoly in this? Because if we look at this as, if we look at all of the networks, everything we have today started off as British Telecom, the Postal Service. And whilst here and now, this is a small trial of something, the reality is that we are at the beginnings of an industry, and what you're starting to do could be the future of how this UTM and all of this is integrated in the UK. And are you guys going to open it up? Are you going to allow other people involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So just I guess to set everyone's mind at rest, we don't have an aspiration to go and deploy hundreds of millions of towers around the world, and towers themselves will have a finite lifespan. And over time, we hope to prove with the technology that you can get away with less dedicated hardware on the ground. So what is one of our design objectives, as I said, is enabling more people to access and utilize automated drone services. And to do that, we are setting up a mechanism where people can effectively deploy their own towers and then configure them accordingly. So we will announce more details on that kind of mechanism, but it's important that we point out that it is designed to be a repeatable technology. And actually, one of the things I can tell you what we're doing, but I can't tell you where we're doing it yet. But we're actually got a few of these corridors coming here in the UK, but we're also working internationally at the moment as well with a few partners. So this is all about building a body of evidence that proves that the technology works in a number of areas. So we've always striven at Altitude Angel to do the really hard stuff, the complicated stuff, and learn the hard lessons, and then get them out there so that people can benefit from that. And this is really just an extension of that. So rather than kind of create a walled garden, if you like, which you get in a lot of test areas, be put in a TDA, etc. One of our absolute design objectives here is this needs to work in non-segregated airspace, and it can work in non-segregated airspace because of all the safety features and the DAA technology on board. So Ian, I hope that answers your evil monopolistic question.
It's just, obviously with anything like this, we are at the start of something which could be how we lay the path in the future. We've got masts coming out of our ears at the moment in the UK. You know what it's like, Richard. There's a nice big one as you drive past the M4 not far from where you are. Can never work out what that thing actually does. But yeah, we've got mobile masts. They're going up, as quickly as they go up, we burn them down. But,
You might be talking about 5G ones.
We're talking about 5G ones, but and you are going to be facing this kind of opposition as well. People are going to assume it's going to irradiate their children and to take their loved ones in the night. So for you guys, when you are building this network, it's not as simple as you say, just tuning up to a field and putting a tower in it. Right. It's the whole infrastructure around it.
So we've been doing an awful lot of work with the landowners, first and foremost, who obviously are the people who have the most questions initially, because then you knock on the door and say who you are and you'd like to stick an enormous tower in their property, and would they mind? There are lots of questions that go with that, particularly when you start saying what they're for and what they're going to be doing. But education is absolutely a key tenet of what we're doing at Arrow. It's not just about educating drone users, the UTM market, and the regulators on what the technologies can do and how they work. It's also about educating the general public and not to be fearful. I think the other thing as well is, it's not a design objective to cover 100% of every country in sort of Arrow towers. They're designed to closely match how the first sort of flight paths were created between commercial ports, effectively. So we would expect to see Arrow corridors going up in areas where there is a specific reason for them to be there, because there is a big demand for that service, or putting in a single Arrow tower around a very sensitive installation, or an installation where normally would be off limits, but now they want to turn that into a sort of a permissions-based drone zone that they can allow and welcome flights in. So good examples of that might be the US Park Service or National Trust, etc., here in the UK, where they can now see those flights, they can manage the risk, and they can welcome drone operators on board. So,
oh goodness me, come here, do the parks here, because there's terrible problems with drone incursions over wildlife, over the rhinos and all that sort of stuff. Just holiday makers wanted to make their videos, but my word, it didn't half cause a fuss. So yeah, I could see a use case for it here straight away. So sorry, Louis, I jumped on top of you. You go first, and I'll go again.
No. The question for Richard is: so your towers have some electronics. So what we might expect as a development plan is to plug in those electronics and have every cell tower with that electronic those electronics?
I think there is an objective to understand how we can minimize needing to deploy dedicated Arrow hardware. In our testing, we're going to be obviously dialing in a lot on, what kind of range can we get out of these pieces of kit? Where are we really certain that we need them, so that we don't have to put, quote unquote, Arrow towers every, 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, what have you. So we like to find a way to minimize that and, for example, use existing infrastructure that's there. But over time, I think it becomes less relevant to start thinking about camera-based systems and the things that would require mass deployment of new hardware, and then looking at existing telecommunications platforms which have already got, in many countries, have got very good coverage in certain areas, and in other countries they have almost ubiquitous coverage across the entire landmass. So there is an opportunity to get to that, but what we're trying here is a kind of typical crawl, walk and run type scenario where we've selected an area. It is very reminiscent of difficult operationally, in the sense that it isn't in a restricted area. Anybody can fly there from GA. There is helicopter low-flying traffic for helimed services in the area. Thames Valley Police frequently transit the area. There are lots of drones. There's a model flying club. There are private grass strips, and we're not far away from Heathrow, etc. There's AWE to the north. So, what we've tried to do is capture an environment that is as close to as challenging as we can possibly find right now, and then start to build out the operations and build out the data. And once we've got some confidence, we can start figuring out what we can remove from this equation without reducing the safety of it. Because I think that's the overall goal, is to make these things incredibly cheap to roll out. And I think already we're at sub sort of 10K, 10, 15K for a tower, which is, is pretty good going.
It makes it much cheaper than a 5G tower.
And not
as
even
long as it's not,
which is good.
Especially when you have to put it up twice because it gets burnt down the first time.
Yeah, well, they just need to make them fireproof.
There's another solution, Richard, but I won't say it.
But then this is surely something that that all the cell phone providers are rushing and want to be part of, and that surely they want to eat your breakfast over this one. Why would we go to you and not a cell phone provider to put towers with sensors on top?
Well, I think I think one of the things that's clear, and certainly as we release more information public, will be it's not about owning an infrastructure network. The towers themselves provide information, or rather they provide data. It's devoid of context. It doesn't have any services built over the top of it. What the towers then do is they relay that information to our UTM platform, which effectively does two things. The first thing it does is it provides a common interface to anyone that wants to integrate and get access to fly. So that's through our standard APIs, and we'll release all the Arrow API documentation in due course. And then the second thing it does is it actually provides automated separation services on top of that data. So it's able to standardize and make sense of all of the information that it's seeing in real time, and then issue those instructions. So, communications network providers, telcos, etc., are a massive part of Arrow, because they do provide the towers with their communication backhaul to the platform. But equally, we also have redundancies on board, so that if terrestrial networks fail, we have satellite communications to fall back on. And again, because the towers have that infrastructure, it's not necessary specifically for the drones to carry multiple redundant comms hardware. But as I say, it's not about one piece of the pie. There are lots of different stakeholders involved. But without the UTM on top, without the processing of that information, without the standard interfaces, without the algorithms, actually all you have is a network that provides raw data, and there are lots of those about today. So it's about packaging that together and delivering that with a specific view of supporting automated drone flight that we bring to the mix, really.
So as part of this, Richard, so I was just going to say, is the autopilot specific? Is the ear end, let's just say, the bit that is flying, if it loses communication, is there certain requirements going to be that it must it must be a certain type of autopilot that's going to do this, that's going to do that, or
So we've been working extremely hard with the CAA to not place specific hardware requirements on people, because again, that increases the barrier to entry and potentially blocks people out of the market. But what we are doing effectively, and the way I describe it is, you either love it or you hate it. If you're a GA pilot, you probably hate it. But the way I like to describe the service is effectively it operates a little bit like a digital co-pilot. So it's a bit like having the same language speaking co-pilot always giving you one of a number of the same instructions to any particular onboard autopilot, and then the vendor of that system that providing integration interprets that standard message appropriately for their vehicle. So for example, Altitude Angel's network might say return to base as a common message. It won't speak, for example, Mavlink. It will use its a very lightweight proprietary messaging format that we will publish the schema for. But what that does is it allows every single vehicle manufacturer, every single pilot to know exactly what range of commands they're going to be given, and then we publish exactly what kind of action we expect them to take when they're given the instruction. And that way it's down to the vendor to choose how they wish to interpret that instruction. So we have some aircraft that are very, very large that will be flying in that corridor, that will always have a secondary human look at the instruction given by the UTM with a timeout on that, so that if they fail to acknowledge it positively or negatively within the timeout, the instruction happens automatically. But then if a human steps in prior to that, it will either do what the human said or not do what the human said to not do. And then we have other folks who are a bit more, have smaller airframes, they have a different risk profile, and they're able to take the instruction that Altitude Angel gives to their autopilot and then pass that directly through to their autopilot. So we will publish about 8 commands that we will send, but we'll publish those, and then people basically meet that, and then we verify they've done that integration before they can fly in the network.
So basically, we won't be needing electronic conspicuity and any legal authority that has access to a special interface of that system can see exactly who is flying when and where.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we're open to the regulatory discussion and the enforcement discussion, because I think it stands to reason that this type of technology is going to be very interesting to the security services, to the regulator, in understanding who's flying in that area. But today we don't have a specific requirement to open that up. We haven't been asked or approached by the CAA to, for example, connect to a registry, etc. So our standard sort of privacy policies will kick in there. But you're absolutely right. It's a good question. You wouldn't be required necessarily to carry a specific piece of hardware on the drone capable of emitting a signal. One of the things the Arrow network does is it authorizes on every flight, every single flight, and it uses 2 types of ID, effectively one for, well, actually 3 if you count the drone as well. But we use one for the authority or the company, the entity that's operating the flight. We use one for the drone itself, and then one for the unique flight. And the one that we tend to broadcast from the Arrow network itself is the flight specific one. So once you've landed, that identity is gone, and you get a new one the next time you come back. But it's always, it's never reassigned. It's unique to you, and it's that way in perpetuity. So there's lots coming up on that, and obviously we're keeping, and we're part of the ASTM standards processes, etc. And we're looking at which one of those makes sense. But what we're looking to do is to minimize the burden on anybody that wants to fly within that zone, so such that the towers and the network can take care of the identity broadcasts, and then the people who want to go fly can just take care of the business of going to go fly. That's really what we want to abstract from.
Richard, next time you're in this podcast, can we call you Big Brother Richard?
You can call me Big Brother Richard, but I wish that it was true, because we won't be able to see those flights, right? We can, from the operations center, we can obviously keep track on what's happening in the network. But the goal, there's a very big difference to being able to see and being able to identify and retrieve personal information about those operators. But certainly initially in the trials, clearly we will know every party that's taking place, and we will know the flight schedule. But obviously, as we go forwards, whilst we'll continue to understand the flight schedules, again, it's a bit like, it's a bit like a pilot submitting flight information to a tower. You can argue that the tower is a big brother, but it's not operated as a big queryable registry of who's doing what and where. It's the towers have to have the visibility in order to be able to provide the service. So we think that's a reasonable trade-off, providing there are reasonable privacy controls in place.
So the
I
aircraft
would tell you to start deploying that in New Zealand around Tokoroa, because we have the alarmist here and he really needs that.
So Richard, the aircraft will obviously communicate with the towers via your own lightweight communication, which will be closed in the sense of we're not talking like remote ID open for everyone to receive the aircraft. You're offloading all of the all of the handling of the object avoidance, the collision avoidance. You're offloading that to your network, basically, aren't you? So what you're doing is the aircraft in many ways is still dumb, in the sense of the aircraft is taking this instruction from the Altitude Angel network. You're monitoring the area and you're providing the aircraft within that area the instructions of what to do depending on other flight plans and things like that, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we do have folks that want to fly up and down the network and test their airframes that also have kind of like a sense and avoid capability on board, and that's absolutely appropriate. One of the things that we're trying to do from the UTM side is supplement those kind of onboard systems, which typically are themselves are quite simple. So, they typically kind of break down to either radial systems that have a particular sphere of view, like 180 degrees in one direction, or 90 degrees, 120, etc. Or you get the typical kind of less sophisticated, but kind of, we call them compass point sensors. So you might have, very simply in the hobbyist world, for example, you have 4 ultrasonic sensors that are for near obstacle detection. One of the goals of Arrow is to understand what, at takeoff, what are the capabilities on board the vehicle that the network can also rely on, and how can the network guarantee the flight, the escape trajectory, if you like, of a vehicle that then executes based, an avoidance maneuver based on what it thinks it's seeing, such that we don't accidentally, in a very crowded environment, have already sent another vehicle into the location that you're planning to go to. So what we're trying to do is effectively make sure everything is always planned, even the, as far as possible, the unplanned maneuvers, by constantly refreshing those escape vectors within the network. So, there's a lot that goes into just going from A to B across the network, but the goal is to reduce that complexity to effectively a couple of API calls for the developer, so that you can, in theory, you could build an aircraft as a hobbyist and go fly it. There'll obviously be regulations that come into place around type certification, all this other stuff, etc. But certainly there would be nothing from a technical perspective, from the Arrow's corridor perspective, from locking out those people that want to do that on a low budget.
The only problem I see here, and this is the last thing on this, is really, obviously, everyone within your network you can control, for the most part. If you said who's in there, where they're going, therefore you got your constant vectors. I suppose the big issue still here is the unforeseen, the phantom on the ground who isn't part of your network, who decides to hop up to whatever altitude he's at. He's not transmitting, he's not got remote ID, and it's how do you integrate that then into your network, because that needs to be integrated into your network to be able to avoid it with your, and that's where I suppose your tower sensors are coming in at that point.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where the detect capability comes in, and very simply, we just refer to effectively 2 different classes of air traffic. So we have UAS, and then we have everything else, and then we have on both sides, UAS and drones, we have cooperative and uncooperative. And as we all know, right, you can be uncooperative by accident, ignorance, etc., or you can be uncooperative deliberately. And that's not unlike at all the regular aviation environment, right? And regular aviation operates through careful risk management, and the Arrow corridor is absolutely no different. So we work on the principle that, ultimately we manage what we can, and then we deal with what we can't. So if we see, quote unquote, if the sensors see an aircraft which is not cooperative, whether it's a drone or GA, then we have to manage the aircraft that we can communicate with to move them out of the way of the risk. And that might mean, it's a very simple maneuver that we can execute that basically changes your flight path, or it might mean we have to issue an instruction where the algorithms work out that it's not safe to continue and we ask you to land or abort the flight at the next tower. So that's one of the reasons why we've spent, the best part of about 2.5, 3 years overall, going back way before Operation Zenith that we did, looking at how time plays a critical role in this, not just in latency of communications, but also the refresh rate of sensors, the different accuracy of the sensors that we have, so that as you fly, all of these conditions can also change. You could be flying with a really super low latency connection, and then something changes in the environment that means now mid-flight you're on a super high latency connection, and we have to be able to deal with that. And one of the ways the system does deal with that is by dynamically adjusting the sort of, if you can imagine, sort of bubbles that we place around, virtual bubbles we place around all these vehicles, which it will then start to take certain actions. And that's been the subject of some of the research projects that we've done with the European Commission, etc. We've been able to test those things there. So there's a lot that goes into trying to make the right decision, but equally trying to make the most minimally invasive decision, because obviously it's very easy to just issue stop to everything and make it all land, but that's very inefficient and possibly very dangerous. So
at the moment in America, I'm trying to bring our American chums back into the picture here. They have those various sports games that no one else in the rest of the world has, and yet they claim to have World Series for them, all those sort of things. That's it, isn't it? It's baseball. That's the one. The World Series where only they play it. But they're trying to change the rules with the FAA to be able to actually shoot down stuff and planning after detection. Where I'm taking this is, so the Civil Aviation Authority and the UK love what you do. The European stuff you work with love what you do, but it doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere else. And again, you are perhaps falling foul of the common sense rule that we have here, because where you're leading us is that you're allowing people to fly without me having to pay for extra gear to go in my machine, and you're spotting all the other stuff. So that's going to offend, particularly in America. There's lots of companies that are trying to line up. You have to buy our sensor before you can fly, and that's not going to work. How are you going to make? So go on.
Can I speak to that real quick? I feel like we're being characterized here, and I mean, I would be the first to say I'm not the one to speak 100% on this, but I mean, I don't think the perspective is we're trying to shoot everything down. First of all, I mean, we do have a committee, so to speak, that's working towards trying to solve this, and as much grief as they get, I'll be 100% up front and say I'm not going to make fun of Richard. I think Richard's doing great stuff, and I think that I am probably going to get poo-pooed for this, but I'm for regulation 100%. Like, it has to happen. Like, it's the only way that I'm ever going to be able to really apply the technologies the way I want to. So, and that's just for me and my selfish reasons. So, I mean, I don't think that we're trying to shoot stuff down. I don't know what that was referencing to, but the DAC and the FAA is looking towards a remote ID, and whether that's going to cost additional funds is still not that's so far from reality to being discussed. Like, the manufacturers are going to include the remote ID hardware more than likely to begin with. So if that happens, you're not going to be paying. I mean, I get it. I get it. But I don't think it's about the money grab as much as it's I don't even think they understand it yet enough to make a money grab. I mean, I don't think.
No, they do. They do.
We were being characterized as gun-toting, wanting to shoot down drones.
No, the people that run baseball, is that the World Series or what? Well, I don't know what that is.
No, I don't know if I would look to them to be the authority on American culture, though.
No, but they have requested special permission to use electronic devices to electronically shoot down,
Okay.
which is that carries all sorts of problems unless you're the manufacturer of those devices. When you're going, oh yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to do that.
But again, that's what speaks to. Again, I think that is simply people trying to make decisions and trying to do something outside of their own knowledge. Again, you're exactly right. Some people made a demonstration, said, look what we could do to solve that problem from last night's baseball game. And yes, the idiots at MLB made that decision to make that as an action. But I don't think that speaks to what all of America is trying to do with drones. I mean, I get the joke. It's a funny joke. It is. But anyways, that's all. I just wanted to say, I do think that it's not going to end up costing users. You're not going to have to go. You'll have the choice to either buy hardware that's compliant or make your hardware compliant. And that's a choice.
Do you know the major problem with the remote ID is that it's going to identify where you are as the operator. That's part of the standard.
Yeah, and again, I think all of this is still in discussion and isn't actually laid out. Like you implied earlier also that all of this would be just publicly easy to be grabbed and information. And sure, that's been discussed, but none of this has been solidified yet. So do I think that that's going to be the actual result? Absolutely not. I don't think that every Joe Blow on the street is going to be able to plug into the remote ID and figure out who's flying what and where. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's the way it's going to be implemented in the end, whether it's being discussed that way or not. So I could be wrong, though. I could be 100% wrong.
I try and stay out of these policy conversations because it's just like, you guys are doing a great job talking about it for me.
Awesome.
But I think that I will say that, like, I mean, I just don't, it's not my jam, like I care about doing the tools.
What you need though is a safe sky.
I mean, Patrick Egan told me I would.
Oh, in me as well. He's told everyone that.
Don't believe Patrick.
But I will say, so I had an interesting experience last week where, like, look, I'm surrounded by law enforcement, and we jumped through all these hoops to get into this TFR and the waivers and whatnot. And I'm standing in the middle of this post office in this disaster zone, and they're all dispersed out. Everybody's flying, and I'm just sitting there, like, waiting for them to come back to test SD cards. And the post office had a little bit of damage from the fire. There's some insulation that got pulled out that had caught on fire. And a truck pulls up, and this, like, 15-year-old kid gets out, or 20-year-old kid. Pops it. He's like, mind if I pop this Mavic in the air? I'm just going to take some pictures for my boss of this inspection. Pops it up, takes the pictures, and then, like, drives away. Totally illegal, and totally, like, and I was like, well, there's a TFR, and he's like, oh, I'm not gonna fly very high. And so he pops it up at like 30 feet, pops in the car, writes his report, took pictures with his phone. So I just feel like,
but that's
like,
what you need.
To say that? I'm not going to go over to this kid. It's like, look, if you had 20 sheriffs here 20 minutes ago, there would have been a very interesting dynamic to all of that, So.
But that's what you need from Richard in this firefighting operation is a secure sky, isn't it? And we're not anti-regulation, Troy. We're very pro-safety.
Oh yeah.
But
and I will say that every fire I've been on, like, even though there's a TFR, there's always contractors trying to sell footage to the news media and unwarranted drones. That's been every fire for the past 3.5 years, even though there's TFRs and you have to unlock drones and all of that stuff. That's been every single time I've been out there.
But I bet it's manned aircraft as well, isn't it? I bet it's not only drones.
The manned aircraft, like, I think because there's such the Campfire air support team, I mean, those guys are in. I mean, there's tons of helicopters and planes flying in the aircraft space. Like, I think that manned aircraft knows well enough to stay out of the TFR, or you will be arrested and your plane's taken away. Like, those guys take it incredibly seriously. I think it's just on the drone side, there's been a big public, like, if you fly, we can't fly for wildfires campaign. And people realize it, but it's more like after the fire when it's kind of, you want to be the first one to get the footage to whatever news organization you're with or whatnot. And, I don't know. I don't know, the rules just seems like a bit of chaos when we're trying to do it right, and it takes all of this effort, but yet some kid just drives by and is like, oh, hold on, let me pop this up real quick.
So, Richard, are you going to be standard number 43 or idea number 43 of 174 different ways of doing this that's going to pop up? How is it going to settle down? And obviously, you're trying to prove the technology whilst others are going to try and prove the revenue stream.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there are a couple of things that come back to mind from a couple of the threads that were spawned there. I think the first thing I want to kind of just come back on is this notion of the security response. And I think it's natural to have the desire that when there is something that's in the airspace that shouldn't be there, we've got to do something about it. And traditionally, before drones, we had the Royal Air Force or the US Air Force, and they kept us safe. But it's obviously not practical to dispatch the US Air Force to take out a Phantom 4 over a tiny stadium. So, the problem, I think, with the security response that we see today is that it's very short-sighted, and it works when there is one target in the sky and it's the drone you want to take out. If we fast forward to a time 10, 15 years from now, when we see much more ubiquitous use of drones, there could be potentially hundreds of vehicles within the target area, and identity becomes much more important. And it's a classification issue. You've got to work out who you want to take out and how you want to do it and how you want to minimize the damage. I think in those types of scenarios, we tend to think about identity as being something which has to be guaranteed. Today, I think even as we look through the ASTM standards, etc., although they sort of make reference to the fact that these things might come, they're still open broadcast. They still can be received. They still can be faked. And in that regard, they're very similar to ADS-B type signals, which again can be received and can be faked. Only this time, as I think someone pointed out on the call, I can't remember who it was, but quite rightly, you can also identify the location of the pilot. So, these things are not necessarily in alignment with privacy rules. Today, for example, we have pretty good controls over how vehicle licensing information is protected. We don't typically tend to broadcast our identities from small RF beacons as we drive up and down the motorway. Whether that changes over time, fine. We don't know how that's going to work. But the UTM system will simply adapt. And one of the goals that we've got for our UTM system is to minimize the burden of those changes as they're coming into effect on the people flying in the zone. So if that means the flavor of the day is ASTM, then that's exactly what the towers will do, but the towers will broadcast them for you. The interesting thing is, though, without the tower solution, you are fairly limited into what else you can do, right? So you tend to jump to these other very similar, very close to our heart solutions like local broadcast. But the tower system or a UTM system provides you with the ability to do a reverse lookup. So you can simply give the controller of that network a latitude and longitude and a time slice, and it will tell you what it saw and who is there if necessary. So you do have the ability to do these things in a much more secure way that doesn't yield any broadcast information, but could, for example, be set up to authorize access to police officers, which is typically where people get very, very concerned. And equally, to digitally track the request made by the police officer and to check that it was fair and reasonable and valid. You can't do that with an open broadcast radio system. The police officer is simply going to receive anything and be able to detect whatever the heck that they like. And how they use that information is then going to be subject of a criminal court case probably at some point. So, I guess long story short, it's great having targeting systems. It's great having counter UAS systems, but they work at the moment quite well on the basis that there aren't many UAS. Transfer that to a corridor, for example, where there could be hundreds of those things flying. You have a very different problem. And, the standards that we see proposed today, the responses that we see coming in today just don't really work in that environment. And we have to think of another way. So, it's there's no easy answers here, right? Doing something different, of course, does pose new questions. But equally, if you're posed with new questions, you shouldn't turn up with the same answers that you would normally bring to that kind of argument. I think that's the challenge we see in a lot of those regulatory groups that we go to.
James is going to give you some trouble now, but I'm going to red card you for your common sense. It's an old phone. Richard, there's too much common sense. It's never going to catch on. It's never going to catch on.
And why he's doing so much common sense? I really would like to hear what our alarmist friend has to say about a system like this. Will it be detrimental to elderly gentlemen flying drones in a park?
I would hope not.
Bruce.
I can't hear.
Volume, I think, Bruce. Volume, Bruce. Microphone battery's gone flat.
Bruce, microphone. Well, we can suppose it is detrimental because he renders Bruce speechless.
You beat me to it there, Gary.
Oh, he's gone. All right. Well, let's whilst we're waiting, let's say hello to James. Hello, James. You've got some questions for Richard.
I couldn't resist. I'm going to be kind to you, Richard. But yeah, no, I saw the news.
James, but go for it.
I would.
I saw the news, and I think it's brilliant. You know, I do a lot of work doing safety cases and stuff with operators who are looking to fly BVLOS, and you know, it's definitely something that sounds like it's got a lot of promise to it. And I need to. I guess there's a few questions like which probably people would be interested in. So like I probably missed some of this, so please excuse me. But what kind of range do these towers have? You know, reliably, and are the CAA is there any approval in place yet, so the CAA will basically turn around and say, yeah, that's a valid form of sense and avoid, or a means of being able to use that in an operational safety case to say, look, if we want to fly BVLOS, that's an acceptable means of separation.
Cool. So 2 questions on the precise technical makeup of the towers. You might have missed the part where I said I'm happy to talk about what we're doing, but not how we're doing it yet. So that's not information that I'm going to share publicly, but there will be information released on that soon. On the second point, we're working towards certification and approval with the CAA. You know, it is an objective to have open, ubiquitous, autonomous flight within that region, and that only works if the CAA and the NAAs around the world recognize that as a valid solution.
Yeah, the first question was about range. So, like, what kind of range do you think you're going to reliably get out of this system?
I'm going to take you back to my earlier point. I'm going to tell you right now, it's enough for what we've petitioned the CAA to be able to do.
Yeah. Okay. No, it sounds interesting, and you know, I think using ground infrastructure is definitely the way that the drone world is going to solve this problem. I think, you know, putting ADS-B on board every single drone out there is never going to work. Like, I'm sure if we speak to Avionics or someone like that, they'll probably tell us otherwise. But I think, yeah, you know, there's a lot of issues with that. But yeah, using ground infrastructure, you know, I've seen proposals put forward using sort of counter UAS solutions, and you know, I guess it's something probably quite similar, but it's it's got a lot of merit to it, and it's you know, I think how that then integrates into the open access UTM stuff and those kind of considerations will be quite interesting. Yeah, I think it's a good project, and we definitely need to catch up after this at some point. I'm always talking to Dave Walters, so I dare say we'll have some conversation over the next couple of weeks.
Great stuff. We'll reach out.
So, Richard, your system will be vulnerable to something like it was used on World War II, like the aluminium foils.
Window.
It will be susceptible to the rules and the laws of physics. So we have to bear that in mind.
Yeah.
Will it be susceptible to an old person's TV? Because if anyone follows the news in the UK today, an old person's TV was taking out half of BT's network in one village.
How does that work?
I don't know how they thought that worked either.
No.
Was it just Wi-Fi, or was it like the copper?
The old TV was giving out a road signal when it was powered on. The they actually had to have an analyzer, and they tracked it down, and it happened every day at the same time, and they went, it just can't be right, and they went and they hunted it down. It's quite an interesting story, actually.
I'm intrigued because I used to install quite high-end TV systems for a living, and I'm trying to work out how old
is
this
it
TV
one you did? Is it your fault?
No, but I'm trying to understand, because it can't be, we've got no analog TV in the UK. It was basically spark burst interference. Now, only one of two things could be happening. It was either on the antenna side, so the antenna was actually transmitting it out, because for it to be picked up by the local network, it must have been a fair amount, or the TV was right next to their own BT socket or something like that, and it was feeding back up. But we've not had analog in the UK for 10 years, roughly now. Anything you would have, even if you used a converter box, would have to have a SCART socket. I don't think anything. It sounded like a 40, 50-year-old set, but I'm not sure. Weird.
Could be a Raspberry Pi 2 with an RF modulator.
Or just running off one of the pins.
Some dodgy, some old person was up at 7 o'clock every morning, turning the telly on, and the whole village lost internet.
You never know what these pensioners get up to. You can't trust them.
Exactly. But Richard is going to any system that deploys sensors is going to discover spurious noise of things happening when the milk parlor goes on along the M4 or something like that, or when the popcorn machine goes on in the football stadium or whatever. That'll just be a matter of time. They'll pull up a sandbag. I always refer to on our radar screens on Exmoor, we had a mark where the vans used to go over the top of whichever bit of Exmoor it was, and they would show up as a primary return on our radar. There's going to be all sorts of stuff they're going to have to find out. But it does reek a little bit of common sense.
Sounds like fertile ground for AI to me.
Oh, Bruce.
It does raise the question, with these kinds of systems, and I think we always come back to that same old question of like how safe does it need to be? And when looking at sort of I suppose surveillance or surveillance as a primary means of separation, or sense and avoid systems, like what's the CAA's current benchmark for that? Is it, if it's the human pilot, then pretty much it doesn't have to be reliable at all, but what kind of standards are they expecting us to reach?
I think from our perspective, it's quite high is the bar, and you'd expect it to be quite high, because we're obviously looking to remove the human from the loop eventually, except for the operator. Obviously, we want to have people being able to use the drones, etc., but not necessarily fly them. So the second aspect I just want to point out is on the point of systems coming online and sensors detecting things over a long period of time. That's precisely why when we went to the CAA, we didn't say, on Monday, we would like to turn on Arrow and go fly autonomously up and down the network. What we actually proposed was a very, very stringent series of tests and plans that gradually ramp up flight operations that allow us to adapt the test cases based on what the sensor manufacturers are seeing. Because this will be the first time all of these sensors have been used together in one place, in one connected system, where the system is able to verify and corroborate what it's seeing and push information back to the sensor manufacturers. And the whole goal there is so that the sensor manufacturers can go off and learn what they need to learn to enhance those products. Overall, if every individual piece learns and improves, then the overall effect on the network is one of better fidelity, higher accuracy data, and that's better for achieving the overall mission, which is ultimately something that people can rely on and trust to be safe, or at least, as the CAA would say, safe enough.
I have to say, good luck training those cameras because the AI on them, I've gone against them, and depending what you've got and which units, I've got a couple of stories that I can't really say, but they are interesting, and the data build up you're going to have to do for every aircraft kind of type, from just an EB to a model plane, and it not seeing the model plane as a full-size Cessna, that's when it gets tricky.
Yeah, you're You're 100% correct. And at least one of the things that we're doing initially, and Bruce triggered on my landmine buzzword, which is one of the, I don't know if any of you guys have seen a TV program called QI, but they always have an answer in QI that triggers the alarms going off, because it's the one that one of a number of ones that they know someone in the studio audience is going to ask. But, the AI point for us is something which is off limits at this point. We don't have algorithms in the network that are emerging and developing and learning, because that goes against the concept of being able to predict how the system will react. But what we are doing is we're pairing.
Hang on. Excuse me, sir. Can you explain that to the thick bloke, please? What does that mean?
Well, if you have a system which is learning and employs AI technologies, it can create it will react to an input, not necessarily in the same way every time. So if you have a traditional computer program that, for example, takes two variables and adds them together, it will always end up at the same result, right? It's deterministic, but AI systems tend to be non-deterministic, which makes them really, really good for certain tasks, but not particularly good when you want to predict the outcome. So, if you're looking to identify something based on what it looks like, then AI could potentially help you do that, but it's only as good as the training set. And, there are all sorts of wonderful examples of AI being used with enormous training sets. But there are also equal examples of that AI making some big mistakes. So, for example, AI person detection has been shown to have a racial bias when it was developed by a company with 100,000 of predominantly white middle-aged men employees, right? Wasn't very good at detecting non-white middle-aged men. So, AI is only as good as the inputs it gets, but equally it will always react in quite an unpredictable way. And that makes it bad from our perspective as a tool in this example, because we need it to be deterministic in order to be able to allow a pilot to have confidence that if they discharge their or some of the responsibility as a pilot in command to the system, that they know exactly how it's going to work. And imagine pressing the accelerator in your car and it braked, right? I mean, that's the example of a non-deterministic system. Or pressing the left turn signal when the boot opens. That's not what you'd expect from a car. Yeah, it could be a British-made Jaguar.
Richard, you can switch on. You can switch on the red light now. So you assisted AI. That's what's going on here.
I'm sure you're aware. Sorry, carry on, Richard.
I couldn't quite make out what Louis said. Sorry, I think it broke up. But I think he was.
I was saying that you gave out the secret sauce. So you're using some kind of assisted AI system to carry that.
Well, I'm going to just put on my orange light. There we go. I think one of the things I can say is, we're using Arrow to learn, and we're actually competing, and certainly in the later phases have plans to compete different technologies against each other to evaluate which perform better. But actually, that's only possible to do when you have lots of different sensor data. So it's not just a case of the AI, for example, having to rely on one source of data, i.e. the image it sees, but it's then able to supplement that with all of the other sensor data that's available within the Arrow network, and combine that with very sophisticated training data sets, i.e. a human who's able to verify and say, well, it looks like a drone, and it sounds like a drone, but it's not flying like a drone. Those types of things are the kind of scenarios where we have to have humans to help teach. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the algorithm will eventually be turned over to just manage that flight. 99% of that flying, 90% plus of that flying can be handled without visual, optical confirmation. It's the things that the system is unsure about, that it needs to send off to a remote operator to look at and make a decision very quickly. And we'll be tracking and recording everything that happens, good, bad, ugly, so that we can learn from that and tweak it and revise it in the ConOps. So, part of that work with the CAA is to learn what doesn't work.
But AI works so well for YouTube.
I'm so sorry for you guys in UK, because you already have those bunch of cameras spread all over the streets. Now you have the richer sensors in the skies. So come on, are we starting doing pigeons now?
Only on sticks and fields.
to be honest, it's the system is it just sounds to me like a big drone detection system, which is all it is. Although it's just been turned. It's just the UTM. It's just detecting everything in the air. Anti-drone systems do the same thing. It's just a very big kind of spin. There's lots of drone detection systems out there. You could almost comparable. But when you start flying against them or flying with them to understand how they're picking up the signals, it gets really interesting. I mean, I suspect, we did touch on it earlier, there's a camera, probably, there'll be RF detection, probably. I do recommend you look at acoustic sensors, just because that's the one thing that I've never been able to beat.
I'll definitely pass that information along to smarter people than me who are designing our arrow towers and working with the surveillance side of things. But what I will just come back in on there is just to kind of point out, firstly, it's not your standard camera, because I know I've already had some of my team just say, just let them know it's not a normal webcam. No. So that's the first thing. It's not one detection system, right? I mean, one of the benefits of this platform, which is new, is that it's bringing together more than 5, let's say more than 5 and less than 20. I'm going to give you a range, different detection systems in the initial platform, and it's bringing that data together that helps us to helps us to create a much more accurate piece. I don't think we would say it could be 100% accurate, but we're going to strive for that level of accuracy, or at least parity. With given the same information, the same scenario, the same conditions, would a human make the same decision? You can't really fail a system for getting that incorrect at that point, particularly with the regulations the way they are today. So we want to make it safer. Clearly, we want to make it safer, but it comes down to we're working with pretty smart folks at the CAA to help us determine what is safe enough for the scenarios we're trying to manage. But
with towers costing £10,000 a pop, and with all these jobs being lost in the UK, couldn't you just hire people sitting on poles with minimum wage? Wouldn't that be cheaper?
We'd have to issue them all with laptops so that they can connect to the APIs. But in theory, that might be an option, Bruce. Yeah, we could always mention that. We like a simple solution at Altitude Angel, so that might work nicely.
The CAA have got unmanned electronic conspicuity working group at the moment, and are working on basically a solution to make all air traffic cooperative. And I'm guessing this kind of system is kind of, I guess, geared up for a world where things are uncooperative. We haven't got any form of conspicuity mandated in the UK, but the CAA have set a date on this now of January 2024. Which obviously is a long way away, when it comes to actually trying to do something today, and it feels like yonks away. But do you think that this system, how long a shelf life do you think the system is going to have when the plans are for the regulators to bring in, mandated conspicuity in sort of 3 years' time?
Well, I think anybody in the regulatory group, and we're a part of the electronic conspicuity working group, by the way, would be the first to point out that because you've mandated it, doesn't guarantee safety. There are always going to be aircraft that, for whatever reason, deliberate or otherwise, aren't visible using the sensors and the platforms that you've mandated that they have. And precisely the risk profile that most security folks are conscious about isn't the accidental use, it's the deliberate misuse that concerns them. So not carrying your transponder or deliberately obfuscating it. So I always see, and we've always held at Altitude Angel, that you cannot design a system thinking that the only inputs to it will be verified and trusted. You fouled as a UTM on day 0 if you make the mistake that the data that you receive is the only data that describes the environment around you. As for shelf life, without going into too much detail, we've designed the system so that it adapts to the capabilities that evolve around it. And one of the ways you can consider our Arrow platform is as a platform for testing different technologies. So we have different transmission equipment, we have different sensing equipment, we have satellite equipment, we have ground-based and terrestrial equipment. In 20 years' time, there might be a brand new communication mechanism that none of us have thought of. Who knows? The goal is that the platforms will be able to benefit from that technology rather than require people, for example, to down their aircraft fleets and retrofit them, etc. And I think that's one of the key things that's frustrating, I think, to a lot of companies that are early sort of pioneers in UAS today, is that the technology keeps shifting around them. You know, every year there's some new advancement, new battery technology, new camera sensor, and you've got to throw it all away and start again. If this was also to happen on the regulatory side, it would be impossible for people to cope with. So, you know, the shelf life is designed to far outlive us, probably on this call, maybe not our kids yet, but certainly us old folks on this call. You know what? When it's not useful,
young people,
you know, we'll have a different problem to solve. You know, it could be millions of aircraft up there and heading into space regularly, whatever. Who knows? But you know, it's got to adapt. It's got to be useful. And I'm not sure if you were here on the call actually earlier, James, where we said, you know, the idea is that we wouldn't be relying on the mast infrastructure going forwards. You know, if you go far enough out in time, the towers themselves fall away, and we can use existing infrastructure, software-defined radios, etc., that we would find elsewhere already deployed. But certainly, where we want to establish areas where drones are welcome and automated drones want to get about and do their business, then the mast infrastructure is a really nice way of providing, you know, total visibility of what's occurring in that area, planned or unplanned.
Andrew Dibbins is asking how many James, how many drone flights a day have you actually started yet, Richard?
No, we started deploying the infrastructure. We're not flying yet. We expect to be we expect to have permission to fly ready by Christmas, which is the kind of sort of deadline we've got with the CAA for getting the regulatory approval to begin the tests. So that would mean subject to weather, and the British weather is not the best in December, as we all know. We might get one great flying day, it's probably Christmas Day, but then we'll get out very, very early in Q1. And you know, initially we're going to start off. I think the test plan is for two flights, bi-directional flights at the same time. We do that for an undisclosed number of times initially. Based on what we find, we then either have the confidence or don't yet have the confidence to increase that. And I think one of the platforms I was talking on recently, we described that in your mind's eye. If you imagine today, that's a 2-lane highway that's not very busy. You know, it's got a 1 in, 1 out type scenario in each direction at each time. But if you imagine horizontally increasing those lanes and then vertically increasing those lanes and testing various configurations, that's where we want to end up to. But we're not jumping to that on day one. It would be irresponsible.
Are these multi-rotor or are they fixed wing, or are you doing combination?
Combination. So again, it's important for us to think about the network. Ironically, a little bit like the highway infrastructure. You know, as long as you conform, you pay your tax or whatever, and you conform to the restrictions, you can drive pretty much anything, right? You can build your own vehicle and drive it on the highway infrastructure, provided it has brake lights and it can brake properly and it has, you know, headlights, etc. So we're obviously working to establish the minimum set of guidelines possible so that you can build fixed wing and VTOL aircraft and fly them both. And what the network has to do and what the UTM will do is, again, it comes part of that handshake when you join the network and you're about to fly, you are declaring what your vehicle parameters are, and the network makes room for you and accommodates you based on what your aircraft can achieve. You know, if you've got a fixed wing aircraft, that's great, but not all fixed wing aircraft are the same. Some will do 20 miles an hour, some will do 150. Some are 150 kilos and some are 2 kilos. So they all have different risk profiles. And in an automated system, we have to build our algorithms such that we can see anything pop up at any time, and we have to be able to manage that. And that's certainly, you know, so it's a tough goal, right? It would be much easier if we'd have set out and said, we're going to go for this type of aircraft. It's going to have these flight characteristics. There's going to be a speed limit of 50 miles an hour over the ground. That would have been very constraining. And again, it would have been much simpler to say, well, we're going to do it in a temporary danger area, and we're going to charge 50 grand for every company that wants to fly. You know, we're trying to keep all of these things.
That all sounds familiar. Why do all those things sound so familiar? Why do they sound so familiar?
So, just hypothetically speaking, this is more of a commercial question, I guess. Is, you know, hypothetically speaking, if someone was, I don't know, delivering some medical packages between one hospital and another, about 5 kilometers, what would be the cost to be able to install a system like this over a, say, a 5 kilometer route?
Well, without yielding the technical characteristics of our towers, which sounds like you could reverse engineer my answer there to work out how many towers are required. But I'll refer you back to the earlier statement I made around the cost of the towers. Towers are about 15k a piece, and they can be designed.
They just went up by 5k.
They can be designed to mesh together, or they can be designed as a single point. 5k sounds like a reasonable radius to get away with one tower. However, there are circumstances where you might want multiple towers for different risk profiles. So again, part of the discussion earlier was, you know, we selected a specific location in Reading after lots of surveying. We wanted to pick some infrastructure that was difficult to cross, like roads and railway, but we also wanted somewhere which was quite flat. You know, the terrain you're talking about, you know, I'm not sure where it is hypothetically. If it was somewhere very hilly, it would need probably a different sense of configuration, and that's why you can't simply just take a tower and drop it and say it works everywhere. You know, part of the program with the CAA is to work out what you need to adapt and how it fits within the terrain.
It is basically we are on that realm of you can pay to fly, and if you pay more, you get higher priority on the airspace. So we are back to the pay to fly.
That's a model that's been discussed, right? And of course, I'm going to throw my hands up and say, yeah, of course, we've had those discussions internally, because as a company, we have to figure out how to make money. But the design objective for us,
I can see the red light becoming redder and redder.
No, I'm going to go completely green here, because I'm pleased to say we haven't settled on a business model that says if you can afford to pay us more, you can, you know, you can take off before Louis, for example. What we are trying to wrestle with right now is, what does priority mean? Like, for example, like when we talk to some regulators, not necessarily here in the UK, because we've got our innovation team and they're really switched on, but you go further abroad and you ask, how does priority work? Most people will immediately say, well, all drones yield to manned aircraft. And most people are really happy with that. And then you can start to play with that assumption by saying, well, what happens if the drone is carrying a human heart for urgent transplant, but the pilot is just a GA pilot just bimbling around? You know, what do we do with priority then? So we're trying to work out, okay, well, we need a notion of priority in our network, because there are some things that will be visible in the network that we can't control, for example. And a good example there of a high priority object that we can't control would be a police helicopter. You know, we can't have the UTM issue an instruction to the helicopter that says, whoa, back off. Everything else has to move out of its way. So whilst I can't rule anything out, 10 years, 15 years from now, but what I can say is, we're not planning to monetize the network or the service based on how much you pay. But certainly things like time and distance are more important because they represent constrained resources that we have available, right? So if you want to travel in the network for longer or go for further, then you are preventing other people from occupying that network at that time, and therefore that's probably how we'll charge. But honestly, none of that's settled yet. We're in trials.
Is it kind of like linear? So does it only cover a route, or is it sort of omnidirectional in terms of, say, because obviously that kind of would make quite a big impact on cost if it can only go down a certain corridor, essentially.
Yeah. No, so we've communicated them as corridors today because we've lined the towers up, they overlap in coverage. But I think when we communicated in the press release, we suggested that the towers cover 8 kilometers linear distance, but 500 meters wide, so 250 meters either side of the tower. That's not strictly the technical capability of the towers, and they are designed so that you could, for example, deploy them in a grid and cover a wide area and transit freely within that network. The flight paths that we will enforce during the trials are linear. And initially we'll have one start point and one end point. But what we're looking at doing is introducing different entry and egress points to the network, and then starting to experiment with there are companies, for example, I won't name names at the moment because we're under NDA, but there are folks who are building landing infrastructure for drones. And obviously, as the provider of that infrastructure, they will set the requirements for landing on their infrastructure and using it, and that will include availability. So it might be that you want to land on a pad at a particular time, but the pad is occupied, and you need to proceed to the next pad. So all of those constraints need to be modeled within the system and tested in the Arrow platform. So that there are all sorts of constraints. And I think the last point on Louis' point about paying for priority, it's not necessarily paying for priority as well, right? It could be paying for capability. You might want the capability to travel supersonic. You might want the capability to drop parcels. And that might mean that the risk profile is higher, and therefore that's one of the charging characteristics that are involved. But ultimately, the market's going to dictate what it's prepared to pay for the type of operation it needs to do. And it's not for the UTM company to say it's going to cost, I don't know, £5,000 to do a parcel delivery route, because if the courier only makes £5 for that flight, it's not going to work. So we've got to figure out how to make it work. But right now, those are all distant dreams. We're still very lucky to have supportive investors, and we're working to keep the costs low, because at least if we keep them low, it's easy for folks to consider paying a small piece of that in the future.
So here's an interesting question then. My aircraft's in your flight corridor. Who's liable for the flight if the UTM fails to tell me about the air ambulance and to take the diversion? Who's liable for that flight at that point?
I mean, I'm obviously not a barrister, but we work with a lot of smart legal folks. Today, you are. Right? And nothing will change when you're flying in the Arrow network. You are the pilot in command. We will relay the information to you, and you will have a circuit break to make those decisions. We will stand by the information we give you, though, and we actually provide. I think I can't verify this, but certainly a couple of years back when we were the only company offering a commercial warranty on the information that we provided. So, for example, if we're providing, like at the time, this was a service called Airspace Alerts, which did just that. It worked out where you were as the drone pilot, and then promised that it would send you ADS-B data. And if it turns out there was ADS-B data that we should have sent you that we didn't, there was a big commercial insurance policy against that we would pay out on. We are going to have to take more responsibility as UTMs go forwards, but it's not our responsibility to define the law in that regard. What we want to do, though, is make sure that the laws that are defined are appropriate, because ultimately people still need to use drones, and people still need to be able to get airborne without having to pay £5 million every time for insurance, right? It's got to be practical and accessible, and it's got to be realistic. So reality is, right now, even though the system will be sat there, the reason I called it a co-pilot and not a pilot is because there is a human in the loop for oversight, but that will evaporate and that will go away. And it's only through programs like Arrow that we're going to get enough data and information to enable the regulator to feel comfortable to do that. A lot of the decisions that are made today are made from a position of fear or an absence of knowledge. If we can tip that balance, we think that regulations could be more quickly made and more appropriately made, and also regulations that would potentially last a lot longer before they need to be changed. So that's got to be a good thing, right, for the regulators and for the industry.
Again, red card for common sense. Red card.
This guy has had a lesson of common sense before entering the podcast. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just too much common sense.
I just realised that when you said that, Gary, Richard's light in the background went red. I don't know whether it's got like some kind of
voice activated. Yeah.
I thought he had like a little switch under his desk, and he was like,
"Yes, no, you're bang on right." And I suppose you are going to generate the data that we need to prove Bruce's continuous points, and loads of continuous points on the requirements, or that we don't need quite such a requirement on safety. People have been jumping.
If If we can halve the death toll, Gary, I'll be happy with that.
Exactly, we could half it. Well, people have been jumping on LinkedIn where I've posted your grim picture of yourself post with all sorts of technical specs, and people have messaged me and said, does it comply with this, that, and the other? But has he thought about this and has he thought about that? I said, well, I'll tell you what's happening here is he's letting his 200,000 followers realize that that we need to be lobbying for manned aviation to pay more of a part of this. If ADSB is, it's a simple way if they all get equipped. So we need to let the regulator know we're watching, really. And I think that's part of what you're doing there, Bruce. I'm taking words out of your own mouth there, but sorry if I got that wrong.
So does Richard's network of sensors, taste, smell, touch, whatever, when it detects a manned aircraft where it shouldn't be, what is the response apart from basically clearing a path for the unmanned aircraft? Does it file a report or anything to say, hey, there's been a breach of aviation regulations here and this is not acceptable to our operations?
A breach of separation. Wouldn't it be nice if there was an API that we could electronically report airspace infractions by all airspace users? Alas, such a system does not exist today, but rest assured, everything that happens in the network is audited. And if we saw something that was in a place that caused us a problem or one of our drone operators a problem, we would report that as an incident. And there is an existing AirProx reporting system, for example, in the UK. It's pretty mandrolic. I know that there is an attempt to sort of electronify that, but to electrificate it, no, to make it more digital. It's still a web form. But it's a step in the right direction. But the purpose of auditing, right, is to track everything. And for example, within the Arrow corridor, even the weather conditions are logged as every flight is in progress. So you can pick any moment in time and replay everything within the sensor grid. And that could backfire as well, right? It could backfire on us, it could backfire on the drone operator. But the point is, you have to learn, and aviation is blame-free, right, when it learns. So it's not free of consequences. That's different. If you fly illegally, there's the force of the law there. But certainly learning from it and sharing that knowledge is a key goal for Arrow.
It's Gary's fault that it's blame-free.
I've just been mesmerised by Louis' goat porn that is going on in the background there. But that's another thing altogether. No, this is very exciting. I think I'm right in saying it's the first corridor trial area outside of segregated airspace that is so sensor rich in the world. There are trials, sensor based ones in various places with platforms that have been stipulated for a high fee for every flight and only one flight at a time. So I think once you get a few up and away and are running, you will be ahead of the game. And it'd be interesting. You'll be able to bring people up when Farnborough Air Display does happen in 2022. You'll be able to bust them up from Farnborough and demonstrate what you're doing not a million miles away. You can probably see Farnborough from your test area if you stand on your tower. Maybe it'll. I wish you well with that, and I look forward to hearing more. And I look forward to hearing more of the secrets when you're able to reveal more of the secrets.
Secrets will be told.
It'll be very interesting.
We can join the dots. We can join the dots. There are no secrets here.
That's true.
Is there a book? Is there a colouring book? That's fantastic. Why haven't I got the colouring book? I want the
because you've used all your crayons up and you can't play with it.
Yeah, only produces red, unfortunately.
They tasted awful as well. Right, what other stories have we seen? Look, we've been here now 2 hours and 2 minutes, and we've spoken a little bit.
My favourite story was the Mavic Mini landing on or getting caught on the helipad. That just had a smell to it, if you ask me. That someone who was there would fly low in front of somebody, obviously that was angry at them, so they could grab the drone out of the air. It just does. And also then, we can't trace the owner. Well, when the helicopter, the Apache, that got hit by a drone over New York Harbor, when they got one arm of the DJI drone, they tracked them down through DJI. And DJI at the moment is probably bending over backwards to accommodate any requests from the US government and military. So they would be more than happy to hand over the user's information if they went to them with this drone and said, who does this belong to? It just doesn't smell right to me.
Well, the one in the outfield again. That's why I mentioned the baseball, but because that didn't smell right either. Oh, look, we've just applied to the FCC, not the FAA, to the FCC to be able to electronically shoot down or capture RPAS, and magically a Mavic with a GoPro on top lands.
Why did they have a GoPro on it? Why would you put a GoPro on a Mavic? What is the point?
So you shield the GPS so you can fly it in the TFR. But anyway, but that aside, apart from that, yeah. So that also smelt right royally as well. Anyone else see anything else that we want to talk about this week before we disappear off? Going once, Ian's not even there's a lot.
I just want to give a big shout out to a friend that is a usual viewer of this podcast, and I've been working with him, Brandon Gash, and has been doing a great job back in US. So and also the thing that I really think it is to praise is the number of small drone manufacturers that are resurfacing, especially in the US. We are seeing more and more of these smaller, we cannot call them small, it's smaller manufacturers that are improving their game to come up to, especially to the industrial markets. And I think that the restrictions on DJI might be might have some effect on this, but it's great to see new manufacturers coming up.
I'm just waiting for 3DR to re-release the Iris.
Oh my God!
Do you see there's a one of those online petitions to get them back again? I don't quite know how that works.
Oh,
I have a solo here that is dead. If someone wants to take it apart,
I'm after a solo. I was about to say I am looking for a solo right now.
You're looking for a solo?
I am looking for a solo.
And you want me to go and get him complete with gimbal and everything? It's
with
dead.
Gimbal? You're finally arrived.
When did they get a gimbal on those things? Gee. They just Velcro a GoPro on the top, don't you?
Did you
just like
see
that thing in the outfield?
I couldn't resist. Did you see one of the YouTube reviewers? He'd obviously got a Hero 9, and I think he got his Karma out to take it for a fly. And Skydio posted. He held a picture of the Karma, and Skydio posted a picture of. Actually, let me show you. It's better if I show you than it was. Let me just find it.
While he's finding that, James, if you were to deliver packages between hospitals and delivery sort of sizes, what sort of weight might they be, and how far away might the hospital be?
Well, I don't know really. Like, I'm trying to rack my brain of any potential projects that could be like that. But I think the great thing with medical deliveries is actually, value is very light. Medication comes in a little bottle about that big, and some pills which are time critical for patients who you might not want lots of 80-year-old ladies all heading down to their local hospital to go and pick up medication, and or having to come back the following day. So I think I think there's I think medical use case is a good one. I think if we're going to see BV loss, in unsegregated airspace sort of, soon, I think medical delivery is a good one purely because it's, you're looking at a net reduction in risk. So you can kind of almost sort of, you've got a little bit of a play on the emergency services sort of exemption. So the emergency services sort of are allowed to do BV loss because they say, well, it reduces risk in general. So that's one element to it. But there's a couple of other mitigations you can take, which I'm not really going to go into at the moment. But I think it can be done today, actually, with the right mitigations and the right safety case put forward. So yeah, I think a medical use case definitely has some merits.
I can't tempt anything out of you. So, Ian, tell us what you're
Just
showing
the comment,
us.
just the comment I put on it because it did something made me laugh about it.
What is Scotty? Zoom in a bit. Use your zoom.
Oh yeah, I'll have with it.
Top right.
Pinch to zoom. Pinch to zoom.
He put the poster not any bigger now.
Yeah.
And Skydio happened to post on it saying it's missing something, and I couldn't resist just to put the comment.
Usually it's battery. Very good. Very good.
Which it usually does. But I did find it interesting that, people are shouting for the Solo to come back. Obviously, there's a new battery board coming for the Solo. Philip has been working on an open source one to give some more life.
Were they actually ever made in America, though?
What, the Solo?
Yeah.
No.
Brazil.
No,
right?
that's they want it back because they thought it was.
I think it's as American made as Autel is as anything.
Yeah.
But look, they were an American company with a lot of American funding. However, let's remember, 100 million doesn't get you very far, does it? Let's be honest.
It was made in Americas.
It's I've been looking for. I want to do one because I want to. There's some new stuff coming out for it, and I think it's quite an interesting product to look back on because I still think it was ahead of its time. But I do think it's getting a real good lease of life with the Ardra Pilot support now. We've got the fixes for the fact that the ESC signaling wasn't right, and we never got all of the smart. Did we ever get all of the smart shots, Louis? I don't think it did. Some of that was proprietary, wasn't it, with drone code? Yeah, none of that actually came. But no, I think we're getting to the stage of retro drones could be quite interesting now.
It's a product best looked back at.
Well, I think, yeah, and I wouldn't mind seeing if I can get one to actually flip upside down and dance because there's a cracking video of KFs doing that as well. And I suppose the only thing we should mention is Eagle Tree.
Oh, Eagle Tree, yes. Cheerio, Eagle Tree.
I was a massive fan. For me, I don't know the reason. I've tried to have a dig. John at Eagle Tree, I think it was John, I had a bit of contact with in the early days of the channel, actually. They sent me I bought a Vector and they sent me one to review. And I loved the Vector, but the frustration for me was they never listened to the community. It never had Mavlink support. It never had MSP support. And in the analog days, it was a fantastic controller. It did everything very well, but it had no integration with external hardware. And when we were transitioning in modern times to cheaper controllers, why would you buy it when you can't use it with any external hardware? You can't use it with Mission Planner. You can't use it with Ardra Pilot. And I think they just priced themselves out of the market in the end. And they're a victim. It's funny enough what the gentleman was saying about that quad earlier, the Cine quad. One of the big problems in that industry is actually finding good quality hardware. Ardra Pilot has probably more high quality hardware now than poor quality hardware on the shelf.
Sorry, Ardra Pilot has no hardware.
No, you know what I mean. Available, yes, but available for the Ardra Pilot ecosystem supports. There you go, Louis. Let me get it right for you. Probably more high quality hardware than low quality hardware right now. There's an abundance of very good stuff out there. But if you look at Betaflight,
sorry, Ian. There is good stuff. There is very good stuff, but there's also lots of crap.
Yeah, okay. We all know the cheap Chinese clones, but if you take into the fact of all of the race flight controllers are all trying to hit a $40 price point. And that is their goal, is to hit that $40 price point. And that side of it, it's not about longevity because you're probably going to put it in a puddle and set it on fire by the end of the day. But if you're starting to build Cine drones around those things, like for instance, I was looking at iNav. iNav has very little controller support. I've been looking at what controller I can actually put in the rover so I can swap between Ardra Pilot and iNav, and there's very little. There's very little there.
I don't follow these things enough. Look, we've been here a long time. It's late. Richard's already moaning about the time before we even started because he can't go to the pub now.
No, the pub's closed at 10 o'clock. He's not allowed to go to the pub anymore.
Is that coming just already?
Tomorrow.
So, Richard, where do we buy tickets? Where do we buy free passes to the corridors? Do we have to buy the free passes?
You'll have to enjoy the excitement and watch our social media and press channels for when the first flights will take place. But we will be
We'll be there, Richard,
them,
testing it for you unofficially, obviously. Seeing.
I think we should.
Are you burning that tower too? Are you burning that tower too, Ian?
I don't burn towers, Louis. I'm on the side of 5G. 5G is the future. 5G is going to solve all humanity's problems.
Quickly, yes.
And it's going to eradicate them through coronavirus.
Yes, I saw the Hearlink box there. So what aircraft have you fitted it to, Mark, or have you not yet?
Well, I haven't yet, but let's put it like this. That 8 kilometers corridor, I can now cruise it, no problem. I could probably fly that corridor, I don't know, for about an hour or two quite easily because both the babies are sat over there.
Yes. Well, yeah, you could. You could easily get 3 hours just going back and forth in that corridor.
Yeah.
Easily.
So, and I've got the range now. So
once we get the rate, once we get the dates from Richard, we'll test that out.
Yeah.
I think we'd love to be going to the APIs, I think, soon to folks at ArduPilot, for instance, so that they can integrate the Arrow Tower protocols into ArduPilot. That would be an interesting one to do.
Now,
PRs are always welcome, Richard. PRs are always welcome. Just submit them and they'll be inserted on the next master.
Awesome.
Yeah, that actually would be cool, wouldn't it? Be straight to Hearlink. Again, Richard's very much part of the driving force of taking it to the regulator, really. Say, come on, we can do this. Now what do you actually want, isn't it? And that's happening all the time. So fair play to you. Well done, Altitude Angel. I will follow this with interest. Gentlemen, I think I'm going to put a knock on this. It's at 1:15. Going once, going twice. What will Louis put behind him next? That has been distracting me the whole time. Unless he is sat outside by a wind turbine, maybe he is. I mean, who knows?
I can put whatever you want. It's just plain.
Want to know what you can put on there. I'm not old enough.
At least the lap dance is gone now.
Yeah, Bruce will be shot.
Here.
Now, right? I mean, standards have dropped.
Well, this is Wind Turbine Hub channel.
That's right. Yes. Oh, there will be somebody. There will be somebody in the world. No, I won't tell that story. Right. Okay. Wash your hands.
Next week, I'll put something from the lower part of the planets.
You'll be in Brazil next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
all right.
see.
We'll travel safely. I hope it goes.
Stay away from hot wax, Louis. Stay away from hot wax down there.
Absolutely. Dear viewer, wherever you are in the world, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you again with the Degenerating Channel 2100 GMT next week. And please, if you have liked what you've seen, then share it in your socials because we need lots of that. Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks, everyone. See you all next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Care. Cheers, Take care. Bye-bye.